Hi, my name is Greg Canty, and I'd like to welcome you to the Win Happy podcast. I love chatting to people from all walks of life about their lives and their careers, about the choices they make along the way to pursue their happiness, and what winning actually means to them. I hope you enjoy these conversations as much as I do. Thanks for listening. On today's podcast, I spoke once again with a regular guest, Paul Niland, who's been living in Kiev in Ukraine for nearly 24 years. Paul, who's originally from Ireland, is a journalist, a political commentator, and the founder and CEO of Lifeline Ukraine, a national suicide prevention service. As always, Paul provides us with brilliant insights from within Ukraine's capital city. He spoke about the routine attacks by Russia, Orban's defeat in Hungary, EU membership, Trump the Russian asset, and the drone expertise which has allowed the Ukrainian military reach deep into Russia and provide their citizens the first taste of what it is like to experience fear during this pointless war that was started by Putin. He also talks about music and how it reflects the unbreakable spirit of Ukrainians and the role it is playing in the inevitable path to victory. Let's hear from Paul. Paul Niland, a huge welcome back to the Win Happy podcast. How are you doing?
Greg, it's great to be back with you again. I always enjoy our chats, and I'm remarkably well. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, well done. And my biggest concern at the moment, or the concern at the top of everyone's lips here, is, will we get a good summer?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I do, as you know, is I'm a journalist, and for various reasons, I didn't write, for health reasons, I'll be very open with you. I didn't write much for the best part of the year, but I've been back to it of late, and I've written at least half a dozen pieces, maybe 8 pieces over the last month, maybe 6 weeks. I've written for the Atlantic Council, I've written for the Kiev Post, I've written for Byline Times, the newspaper I write most of my stuff for in the UK. And my latest article is always my pinned tweet on Twitter. And if people read my pinned tweet, then it's going to be a good summer.
Of course, what I was trying to do is do a comparison between life here and life over there. Will it be a good summer? It teased us for a few days this week. We were back in the short sleeves, but of course the long sleeves are out again. You know what those Irish summers are like. And of course, if it is good, where will we go on holidays? But life is a little bit different for you, I'm suspecting.
I came on a golfing tour to Ireland, 15 years ago. And it was in July. And so when I packed, I brought some shorts with me, and I was standing outside this hotel in Cork, actually, wearing my shorts, smoking a cigarette, and the postie walks in, and he looked at me, he says, "That's the spirit. You put them shorts on, the sun will come out."
As you're freezing your nuts off.
Exactly. Yeah. It did. The rain came in that day as well. We were all... I remember standing on the first tee, and everyone was pulling out the rain max.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Well, rain is as likely in July as it is in February, unfortunately. That's the way it is here.
Well, yeah, I know how it is. But I mean, when you ask whether it's going to be a good summer, there's lots of ways of thinking about that question and answering that question. What my first thought is obviously the battlefield situation here in Ukraine. And in that regard, in that respect, yes, Ukraine is already having a very good spring, and it's going to be an extremely interesting summer. The sun will shine. We will have beautiful days, and there will be things going on to enable us to make the best that we can of life, despite the fact that we're in a war zone. But primarily, my thoughts are with the situation in Russia's war against Ukraine, and in that respect, I'm certain that Ukraine's having a good summer.
I wanted to chat to you again because, in all honesty, Ukraine, for the most part, has disappeared off our newspapers, our online media, the whole shebang. It's more an Iran story, and the next flip-flop that the lovely Donald Trump is doing with war is over, war is on again, war is over. And of course, every time he's doing his trades and everything else. But I did want the listeners to get one, to remind them that there's a war going on. It's going on for 4.5 years or 12.5 years, depending on what perspective we take on it. And what you just said, Paul, I think that's consistent with what we're hearing over here. A couple of months ago, the phase was, well, Ukraine is on the verge of collapsing. You're going to get wiped out. Russia have taken the upper hand. We're now starting to hear that between drone technology and everything else and depleted resources by Russia, that, Ukraine is turning the tide. And so that is the case. That is the case. And is that the feeling on the ground over there?
Absolutely. And again, that is the topic of my latest article for Byline Times, which is Ukraine's trident. The national symbol of Ukraine is a trident, and there's 3 sharp points on a trident. And Ukraine's drone capabilities resemble that trident. There are short-range drones that have changed the way that the infantry kind of style of combat, how it was fought, and how that's been changed. The long-range drones and missiles taking out Russia's oil exporting infrastructure and their production capacity and their refining capacity is another element. But the really interesting point, which is mainly what I'm writing about and bringing people's attention to, is the medium range stuff. So, when the Blitzkrieg happened at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, so 4.5 years ago, the Russians occupied a piece of land along the south of Ukraine, along the Azov Sea. And those 2 provinces, the reason why the Russians did that is because they needed to build a land bridge to Crimea to keep occupied Crimea supplied with everything that it needs, right? Whether it's water and food for the population or, ammunition for the military element. And the bridge that Putin opened in 2018 across the Kerch Strait is just not a viable long-term solution. The Kerch Strait is a very, very hazardous waterway, and it gets very violent down there. And the foundations that it's sunk into are not going to last more than a decade or so. So, that was what they needed to do at the beginning of the full-scale invasion. They needed to take that land bridge to Crimea, and that is, 4.5 years of war later, that is the only strategic gain that Russia has made in this phase of the war. And what Ukraine's doing with the intermediate range drones, which are from 50 kilometers to 100 kilometers, is breaking the Russian land bridge to Crimea. It's more than just a matter of logistics, keeping their troops supplied with ammunition and fuel across the south and in the war zone around the Donbass as well. It is literally the only strategic gain that they've made since 2022. And Ukraine has broken it, not is breaking it, has broken it. And the highways along the south of Ukraine, the occupied territories in the south of Ukraine, they are just becoming a graveyard for any Russian supply movement at all.
So this learning curve about drone technology for warfare, which was unfortunately forced on Ukraine as a necessary evil. You mentioned the medium-range drones, but now the drones, from what we're reading, they're hitting Moscow, and you've got a reach that's going that far, and that must be having a huge impact on the population of Russia, who, for one reason or another, except for conscription, have been able to keep the war at a distance. It's not on my doorstep, it's far away, so I don't need to think about it. But now in Russia, in the capital, they're starting to witness this war in a particular way for the first time. Am I right in reading the situation that way?
You're right in reading the situation that way. However, Moscow is, I think, about 500 kilometers away from Ukraine's borders. Ukraine's long-range drone capabilities now extends to 1,700 kilometers, right? So it's not just reaching Moscow, which it does with increasing frequency, and exactly as you say, exposing the residents of Moscow to some sharp lessons in life, right? Because you know what? It's not just that the war has been far away. For them, it's been an entertainment spectacle on the television, right? They know there's a war going on, but it hasn't affected them other than them literally enjoying it. When they're consuming the propaganda that is Russian state media. And now that they are being reached, and there are drones overhead, and there are explosions that are audible in various regions of Moscow. Now they know that war is actually it's a shit thing, right? And the interesting thing, what I find quite funny about it, is that they've had very, very little exposure to this, right? But people in Kiev, we've been having these, and my own apartment building was hit by a Shahed drone, right? And the Shahed drones that they originally imported from Iran, they're the size of a car, man. They're the size of a car carrying a big explosive payload, right? They're not like your quadcopter that you'd order up from Amazon or something like that to go and, buzz and have a look over the fields or whatever. I mean, don't confuse this with that kind of drone. They are seriously heavy stuff. And one of them hit my apartment building, and it's one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. But now, after a couple of distant booms in the background, the Russians are all freaking out. The Muscovites are all, complaining and saying, what have we done to deserve this? Why are you attacking us? Well, your country has been waging war against this country, a brutal, full-scale war for 4.5 years, and now you've got just a little taste of it. You're all whining about it. Screw them. But I will say this as well, right? The residents of Moscow, there's going to be some civilian casualties here and there because, the way that electronic warfare works is jam the signal to the drone, and the Ukrainian operator loses control of it and it's going to crash somewhere, right? So there's going to be some losses that are whatever, right? But they're not actually being targeted. Whereas here, civilian objects are targeted all the time and deliberate. There was a mass attack this last weekend, which I can talk through because, again, that's one that will have hit the headlines in Ireland and around Europe, in North America as well. But, the attack before that, which came on the 14th of May, there was one apartment building that was hit by a missile of one kind or another, a ballistic missile, and 24 people were murdered in their homes from that one single strike on one single apartment building here in Kiev on the 14th of May. And then this weekend, I think it was the 24th, they came back and they had another massive barrage aimed at Kiev, which included 90 ballistic missiles in total, right? So this past weekend was very, very noisy. But, here's the thing, actually, is that when Putin wanted to hold his parade on Red Square on the 9th of May, he got Donald Trump to beg Zelensky for a ceasefire so that he wouldn't be embarrassed on his May the 9th parade, right? And prior to Zelensky agreeing to that, the Russians had said, if Ukraine hits our parade, we're going to throw a massive attack at Kiev, and they're certainly going to feel it. There will be retaliation. And so they were given their parade. And then 5 days later, on the 14th, 5 days after May 9th, that was when they killed 24 people in one apartment building. But that was another, massive barrage with 600 drones or whatever. And then this last weekend, they've come back and hit us again with 90 missiles and 600 drones. So as we were saying at the time, the threat of if you hit May 9th on Red Square, then we're going to retaliate like this. Like every Ukrainian commentator was saying, so what your threat is then is you're just going to do more of what you're already doing. And even though they were granted their reprieve and they had the parade, even though it was very brief because Putin is obviously very scared, they still came and, rained death and destruction down over Kiev anyway.
This phase of the war where Russia and the citizens of Moscow are starting to feel what it's like to be actually in a war, and as you were saying, it's more than TV entertainment. With every strike over there, it seems to be followed by a huge flurry of attacks on Kyiv. That seems to be going on now since the end of last year. Am I correct? There was a good chunk of the war where it wasn't on your doorstep. It's been on your doorstep now. You mentioned your own apartment being hit. It's a flurry of activity, constant, for quite a while. So in the same way that the will of the citizens of Moscow are experiencing it, the citizens of Kiev have been experiencing this for quite a while. What is the mood in the city like, Paul?
In the first winter of the war, and I remember the date was October 22nd of 2022, that was when they started hitting the power generating and distribution infrastructure around Kiev. And on that particular date, I got caught in my lift because a power cut happened. That was the first day that they actually hit the power station, right? And I just got in the lift as normal in the evening when I was coming home from dinner, and halfway up, it's all of a sudden, boom, like lift has stopped, everything's black, and I had to call the emergency guys to come and get me freed. So, Ukraine's capital has been under brutal attack. And those, by the way, attacks on civilian power infrastructure, that in itself, yes, it's a war crime, but it's also a crime against humanity. You're not allowed to do that. There are laws, there are ways of fighting wars that are within the parameters of, what the world has actually agreed to. And Russia just ignores them, right? And has been doing since the very beginning of the war. So no, we haven't had lulls. But what happened was, around the same kind of time, I think it was that when Iran started supplying these Shahed drones to Russia. And what they would do is they would wait to launch a number of them at a time. So it would be like 150, 200 drones in the average wave. And so it would take them 2 weeks or 3 weeks to plan an attack like that with 200 or 300 drones. And so there were waves every couple of weeks. Now it's every more or less 10 days, and it's not just drones, but it's drones and missiles. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to deplete the stocks of air defenses that we have in order to be able to kill more people, because the rationale seems to be in Moscow that, if there's one more massive strike, if a bunch more people are murdered or a bunch more people are terrorized, then Ukraine's suddenly going to capitulate. So to answer your question, what is the mood of the people in Kiev? I found a meme that I translated when I shared it on Twitter. And I just, on Facebook, I just put it up without any translation, and it's written in Ukrainian. And so we have this big statue here. It's 105 meters tall. It's the motherland statue. And somebody had AI'd it so that the two hands, because one is holding a sword and the other one holding a shield, and somebody had AI'd it so that the two hands are both facing forward with their middle finger extended. And the slogan says, the mood of the people of Kiev remains unchanged, right? And so that was after the most recent, the strike that was on the 24th. And it's exactly right. We see horrible, horrible things. We experience horrible things. One of the cruise missile impact of Saturday night, Sunday morning of this past weekend was 200 meters from my apartment. And literally the building shook. And I went together with a friend at lunchtime on the Sunday to go and have a look at destruction all around the area of the impact. When I shared the video of that again on social media, right, there was a guy who used to do a TV show in the UK. I think it was Mr. Rogers. And his set was always looking for help, right? And so when I did a 360 with my phone, I'm looking at the destruction everywhere, all around me. But then there's a bunch of guys who are cutting up plywood to measure for people's windows to get them boarded up. There was a tent that was then next to where I was standing, which is where people were volunteering, signing up to volunteer to go and take on whatever duties were assigned to them, whether it's cleaning up glass or whether it's helping people sort out their apartments because they've all been turned upside down. And then next to that was a free kitchen that was set up, like rocked up, and there was food, soup, whatever. People could go and help themselves, and that's the way that Ukrainians react. So yeah, there's anger I always get angry when Kiev specifically is targeted. There's fatigue on nights when you don't get much sleep because the Saturday night, Sunday morning attack went on for hours and hours and hours and hours, and it was explosion after explosion. It was relentless. And so, yeah, I mean, you're tired the next day because you haven't slept, but the mood is still exactly, that motherland statue with the two middle fingers extended. No, this place is not about surrender. And I say, when we have opportunities to enjoy normal life, then that's what we're going to do. Again, that was 200 meters from my home. There's a restaurant that my friends and I often have lunch in. They have a business lunch there, 2 courses and a drink, and it's like €6 or something like that. Yeah, €6. That's what it costs. And their windows were all blown out. And I saw the staff who I know, because I'm a frequent guest. I saw the staff standing outside, and they're all a little bit, literally shell-shocked, right, at what they're looking at. Their place of work has, taken a battering. And all of the windows were blown out. And then when I was walking past there on Tuesday, I saw that they're open serving again. And so I went in. I sat down and I had my normal lunch, and it was a bit drafty. But I wanted to go and show my support for this people who work there. And yeah, we rebuild. We get on. We get back to it because we have to.
And at a practical level, Paul, if that's your business and, the front is blown off the building or whatever, and you're back in work as best as possible the following day, do the government kick in? Do they repair your building for you? Are there GoFundMe things and all the pals contribute? At a practical level, how do people rebuild and get on with things and recover?
So when my apartment building was hit, just to describe it again, I'm on the 6th floor of an 8-story building, and the Shahed drone directly impacted the 8th floor right above my head. So, what's the height of a story in a building? 2.5 meters, 5 meters above my head. That thing went off, right? And so all of my windows blew open from one side of the apartment to the other. The back is where my bedroom is, and there's a balcony there, and all of the windows there were blown open. One of the windows came off its hinges and wouldn't go back into the frame. The panel next to it, the window pane next to it, was broken. And my front, where my lounge is, they all blew in as well. And so what happened was, the next morning, the landlord came in. The police were taking statements and lodging official kind of situation documents, I suppose you would call them. So that's the beginning of the application process to have the government refund you whatever the cost of repairing your windows or whatever damage there is. At some point, those windows will be replaced. And from the attack this weekend, there were 1,000 applications that were made from private residences. I saw this statistic somewhere on Twitter. 1,000 applications for compensation to the government scheme for the renovations that people would need to do to their homes. 1,000 homes, 1,000 families who were directly impacted from this one barrage on the 24th. 1,000.
God almighty. So, Paul, this has become normal life now in Kiev. Your normal is war at this stage. You're so long into this. This is normal life, isn't it? Everyone just gets up and you're hearing bombs and you're under fear, under threat, whatever. But it's normal life now.
I remember some time ago that Zelensky warned of complacency. People should not accept this as something normal because it's not. It's not. And writing an article where I argued a state of war is abnormal. If you get to that state, it means that everything has failed. Diplomacy has failed. Politics have failed. Unless you are Russian. Because if you're Russian under Vladimir Putin, war is the only state of existence that you know. He came to power on the back of launching the second war in Chechnya. He then had a war against Georgia. the beginning of the war in both the Donbass in Ukraine's east in 2014 and the theft of Crimea in 2014, the continuation of that war ever since. It was never a frozen conflict. It was maybe a low resolution conflict at times, but it was never frozen. There was always battles going on in Donbass between Ukrainian and Russian forces. Then his intervention in Syria, and then the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So if you're Russian, all you know is war, right? But for me, I've been working with veterans closely since 2019, and I'm well aware of the effects of war. But I mean, it's not normal. We can't call it normal, but it is regular, and it is a feature of our life. And so, to give you another example, yesterday I was invited to the premiere of a new film that was just launched, which is a focus on the state emergency services workers. So the people who are the first responders that go to impact sites. And the main characters of the film were invited on stage for a Q&A afterwards. And in response to one of the questions, where I think the question was, what can citizens do to help you? And the first thing he said was, stay out of the way, right? First and foremost. I mean, if we're there, it's a dangerous situation, and, we've got all the equipment and the training and so on. So really, you shouldn't be doing anything unless you're asked to help. But the one thing that you can do to help us is please go to the shelters, because that means that we've got less work to do. And it was just, after 4.5 years, and I don't, as I've said to you in the past, I actually don't go to shelters. But hearing that guy say that yesterday, and, his job is saving lives. His job is finding people who've been injured and getting them to medical care, right? And he's saying, like, in response to the question, what can regular people do to help? He said, go to the shelter.
How far away is your nearest shelter?
It's the underground car park below my apartment building.
Okay, and you won't go down there, will you?
I don't. I mean, I did in the initial weeks of the war, because, as you know, I was part of our collective local self-defense volunteer group, and that was where we were. We were at the entrance to the bomb shelter to help our neighbors get in and out as they needed to. And, they're not pleasant places to hang out for any period of time. I mean, people did, set up deck chairs and bring toys for the kids and stuff like that. I mean, there'd be footballs and people, the teenagers could have a kickabout. But it's not a nice environment. And, where one of the dangers, if there's an impact somewhere close by, one of the frequent kind of causes of injuries is shattered glass flying around everywhere, right? So again, all my windows flew open. It was only one window that was broken over the balcony. But I said this the day after this last massive attack, that I stay in my apartment, and the attacks are often at night, and there is a balcony door from my bedroom onto the balcony, a glass door onto the balcony, but that's below where my feet are, right? So my vital organs, my face, whatever, I mean, like the areas that I wouldn't want to be hurt with, big pieces of glass flying around like daggers, that stuff's all relatively covered by the big, thick concrete exterior of the building. That said, okay, so a drone impact somewhere nearby, I'd be all right-ish, I suppose, other than the horror of experience, the impact of one of those things. But if it was a missile, you're toast, you're done for. Like, that's it. But again, by the same token, what is normal? Normal is that we have a couple of air raid sirens pretty much every day. Like, are you going to go and sit in a car park? I mean, whether you're supposed to be at work or whether you're at home in the evening, are you going to go and sit in a car park for 3, 4, 5 hours every single day because Putin's sending whatever munitions towards the rough vicinity that you're in? Like, I mean, you have to have some balance. Work things out the best way you feel you can. But again, the warning from that firefighter yesterday, go to the shelter so that we've got less work. That's good advice. And, another thing that I didn't do for a long time is I didn't actually download. There's an app that you can get that tells you the kind of threat that's incoming. And so, if there's a warning of a particularly large incoming barrage of missiles of one kind or another, then you do see people scrabbling towards the bomb shelter, and they're wise to do so. But, I didn't download the app, and I don't go when there's an air raid siren down to the shelters. What I'm normally sitting on my sofa if I'm at home, and my response was always to look to my right out of my lounge window, and it was a 2-word phrase that the second word is off, right? And that would be it. That would be the extent of my reaction, and I just stayed put and continued doing what I was doing. But that's what I was doing the night that we took a direct hit. I was sitting here on my sofa having a glass of wine, watching TV, and it was loud. The outgoing air defense fire was very, very, very local. And then it got louder when the drone went into its dive. I should have bolted towards the hallway then, but it was literally a second or 2 seconds of that dive, and then bang, everything. The light, the shock wave went through everything. The sound of the explosion, the sound of the glass falling around everywhere. It was a shocking experience, but I survived it. It took a couple of weeks to get the glass manufactured, and a couple of weeks then, because the glass fitting guys, they're busy, they've got a lot of work. It took a couple of weeks to get that installed, but I'm more or less back to normal here. Here's what it is.
Is it obvious, Paul, when you're over there, that there is a heavy-duty attack on the way? I know you mentioned the particular app, but for you, just observing, is it noticeable that more people than usual are heading to the shelters and everything else? Is it that kind of clear? Is it that kind of obvious?
If, for example, I'm on my balcony smoking, then I can see people running to the shelters. There's several accesses and exits from the underground parking, so people will just go to their closest one. But I see that. I see that. Everybody makes their choices. It's so random. This apartment block where 24 people were killed, could have been. There are hundreds of thousands of apartment blocks in Kiev. Almost everybody lives in high-rises. There's very few homes here. And it could be any single one of them. So, who knows? Who knows? I know that I'm going to have longer odds of winning the lottery. But it is a little bit like that. It is almost random, almost, not fate exactly, but if your time is up, if your place gets hit, then you caught it. That's that.
Talk to me about the defeat of Viktor Orban and EU membership.
Friends of mine were in Budapest, actually, for the defeat of Viktor Orban. There's an Irish journalist over here. His name's Caelan Robertson. He's become something of a well-known name and face for his reporting from Ukraine. And he went over and experienced that and spent several days looking around. And he's told me all about it. And another mate of mine was he was traveling back to Ukraine from having been to the UK, and he decided the timing was perfect, and he would also spend a couple of days in the capital to watch Orban's defeat. It was beautiful because of the size of the defeat, or the rejection of Orbanism the Hungarian people delivered. That was one of the things. And I was watching one of Caelan's reports with footage from the night before the election. And I said to him, that kind of atmosphere, that's like the Maidan Revolution was at times. Like there's this, real feeling of joy. And it was the day before they actually went to the polls, right? Yeah, because it was such a resounding rejection of Orbanism, I think that's great. The thing about the new guy, Peter Magyar, is that he actually came from the same party as Orban. And so he's not as anti-EU. He understands the benefits of Hungary being in the European Union. But he's very much anti-immigration in the same way as, we see from the far right of whichever country, be it France, the UK, although they're all splintered. What is the far right called nowadays? Is it reform? Is it restore? Is it, well, I don't bloody know. But that same anti-immigration kind of sentiment is continued in Magyar then from the Orban period. He's also saying some nonsense about the protection of the Hungarian minorities who are in the border regions in Transcarpathia, predominantly the border region between Ukraine and Hungary. You know what? Ukraine is moving towards European legislation harmonization in every area. And what that means for the protection of minorities within any EU member country is going to be all the protection that the Hungarian minorities in the west of Ukraine are going to need. So what Magyar is going on about in that respect, I don't really know. But there's differing messages on Ukraine's EU accession process. And the Chancellor of Germany, Mr. Merz, recently was talking about an associate membership that Zelensky had rejected and saying, we're defending all of Europe, which is a fact. Ukraine is what has stopped the Russians from being able to go on and attack more places. They'd love to. They'd love to attack Poland. They'd love to attack the Baltic states. But we're not only holding them up, we're pushing them back. But I think what Merz was saying was a stepping stone while you're going through the process of fulfilling all of the criteria for full membership, have some of the benefits along the way. And that's not an unreasonable position. I've had European diplomats tell me that Ukraine's timeline is too optimistic. And I myself have said, you know what, there shouldn't be any half measures, either in terms of the benefits of the membership or in what Ukraine has to do to get that, right? Ukraine has to pass all of the necessary laws, all of it, 100%, and then get all of the benefits 100% as well, right? There shouldn't be any shortcut or half measures in either direction. And there's always differing kind of perspectives about what it's going to be, but we're on the right path. And whatever the timeline is whatever it is. The members of parliament who need to vote on the appropriate measures, they need to accelerate their work if they want a faster path for the country to be a full member of the EU. Simple as.
And is that something that will be embraced fully by the Ukrainian people?
Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned Zelensky. He's been in that role now for quite a while. Is he on solid ground? Is he the man? Or are people now starting to talk about, the democratic process and another election and all that kind of thing?
No, the democratic process that's apparently broken, blah, blah, blah. No, that's Russian nonsense. And it is repeated by morons who either are fooled by the Russian narrative or are supporters of the Russian narrative, whether they're useful idiots or whether they're paid idiots. Ukraine is not allowed to hold elections during wartime. Funnily enough, actually, the weekend before last, I was at a pair of rock concerts. There was a band that put on a show on Saturday night and on Sunday night, and I shared a clip from the Saturday night concert on Twitter. And there were all these cretins in my mentions going, okay, you can hold a rock concert, but you can't hold elections. And what about safety? And that. And the first thing is that, there were 20,000 people at each of those concerts. And those 20,000 people, they deserve that few hours off, those few hours of just being a music fan, watching your favorite band doing an awesome gig, right? And they were awesome gigs. And the crowd were awesome as well, right? I on the Sunday when I tweeted some more footage, which was the actual opening of the concert and the crowd reaction, because like the moment the concert begins, the curtain gets dropped and it goes off, right? The reaction from the crowd was just brilliant, right? And so when I tweeted that, I said, trolls not answered yesterday and they won't be answered today either. But I actually did answer a couple of them. And people saying you can hold a concert but not elections. And I said to this one guy, the constitution of Ukraine does not forbid rock concerts during wartime. It does forbid the holding of elections during wartime, right? That's the situation. It's the constitution of Ukraine. It's not Zelensky's choice. It is the constitution. And then another person or several trolls were saying, okay, like, apparently you can't gather large numbers of people for safety reasons. What the hell is this then, right? And I said, what the hell this is 20,000 people who deserve it. But because of the location where it was held, which was a huge, enormous shopping mall, the underground car parks are a certified bomb shelter for up to 25,000 people. So it was actually held, within the stated guidelines of the specific kind of security requirements for an event like that. And I will also go to another gig this coming Sunday as well. I'm not sure how large the crowd is going to be there, but if I've got a chance to go and see music, then I'm going to go and see music. Going back to Zelensky and the question of elections, I mean, if there was an election that was organized for a certain date, which obviously, that's how they always work, then, yeah, trying to guarantee security for lines of people standing out in the street waiting to go and cast their ballots all across the country, that's a very different situation than one particular location with one particular set of, facilities of a suitable size, right? I mean, yes, there's a security issue to the people who could vote on the free parts of Ukraine, but there's a couple of million people who are under Russian occupation who would be denied their right to participate in that democratic exercise. This is their country. There are hundreds of thousands of people who are under arms and on the front lines fighting this war. We can't ask them to take a day off. There are millions of Ukrainians who are displaced within Ukraine. What is their status? How are they able to vote in their current location when they're registered at another one? And then there are millions of Ukrainians who are refugees in third countries, including many in Ireland. We're all famously aware that, the Irish have, extended their traditional hospitality to the Ukrainians who've sought refuge there as well. So, no, Ukraine cannot hold elections until the victory. And then I'm not sure whether Zelensky will even stand. I think he's exhausted. Because of the inability to hold elections, he's actually coming close to what would be if he'd won a second election and done 2 terms, then, he would have served for 10 years, and he's getting close to that anyway. So, I'm not sure that he would stand. I'm not sure that Ukrainians would elect him, but we certainly couldn't have a political contest right now during wartime where there's candidates sniping at each other and bitching at each other and saying this guy's a moron and that guy can't do this and this guy's going to be shit for security and no. This is not an environment conducive for holding elections. And the Ukrainian people are all fully cognizant of this. And there are very few people in Ukraine who are talking about having elections at all. So anybody who talks about the pause of democracy is, like I say, they're buying Russian BS propaganda, whether they're doing it inadvertently or whether they're doing it deliberately. Like, for example, Tucker Carlson and a recent guest that he had on who actually used to, in the early days, work for Zelensky, and she's turned into a Russian propagandist herself. There's a few noisy voices, but they're reading from notes that have been provided by the Kremlin.
If I walk into any coffee shop in Ukraine, in Kyiv, has he done a good job? Are people, brilliant, he's managed the situation perfectly? Is that the consensus over there?
I saw a couple of weeks ago there was a Vox Populi that was done. Kiev has so many beautiful parks, Greg, as you will see one day when you eventually come over. But we have a park dedicated to the national poet Taras Shevchenko. And the Kiev Independent newspaper went around there and they were asking people, what are your thoughts? And the consensus was, as a wartime leader, he's doing a good job. There are various issues that you can have with his leadership, with his team, with this, with that. And this is a free country still, right? People are not only allowed to express those misgivings, their reservations about him, but they do, and rightly so. they're not mutually exclusive things. He is a good time leader, and there are problems with what he's done domestically at the same time. That would be what you would get. But again, the overwhelming majority of people know and understand why we're not having elections, and nobody feels like democracy is being usurped. And it is what it is. My personal feeling is there was too much haste to do things that were ill-considered at the beginning of his presidency. But from the get-go of the full-scale invasion, I think he's been incredible. And, there's lots and lots of ways in which he's performed a blinder on the international stage. There was a funny moment, actually, because, his career, he was a TV comedian, right? So his timing is pretty good. And so recently, the woman who won the last election in Belarus, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, she was in Kiev a couple of days ago, right? And so Zelensky is addressing this group of people, and obviously Tikhanovskaya is there in the crowd. And he said, Lukashenko said that the presidents of Ukraine and Belarus should meet. Svetlana, it's nice to welcome you. It was just a brilliant line, like, playing with the words and stating the truth as well, because Lukashenko had actually said that, but essentially saying, like, I recognize you as the president of Belarus, which, had the votes been counted correctly and had Lukashenko not rigged it because Putin told him to, right, she would now be the president of Belarus and would be reforming the country, which is in fact the country of my first ex-wife. My first wife is a Belarusian. She's not now; she's Irish, obviously. But that's where she's from, and I've followed events in Belarus very, very closely for a quarter of a century because I've been personally tied to it. So yeah, I know a lot about what's happened there.
At a time when there's so little leadership out there, he seems to be a leader that can leave us all with a little bit of hope. Along with the Pope, may I add. Our Pope now seems to be jumping in there in the leadership stakes. I'm not sure if you've been observing him, but he's quite outspoken about a lot of things like pointless wars and things like AI and everything else.
I have been seeing that. Well done, Pope Leo. Yeah. I think he's doing a good job. He is subtle sometimes in his criticism of Trump, but only because he doesn't mention Trump by name. He's very on topic with what he's criticizing about the actions of the United States and under this president.
Yeah, and J.D. Vance had to lecture him about theology, and his intervention in Orban's attempt at regaining presidency didn't work out too well. But anyway, in terms of the economy there, Paul, if you're operating a business, you're getting an education, how are things going there? If I'm a young buck coming out of secondary school and I'm hoping to get a trade, or I've gone to university, are my prospects okay? At a time when war has become semi-normal, or whatever language we want to use, how is it for me if I'm, trying to start my life as a career person, as a professional?
So I'll tell you a little story. On Sunday, when my friend and I were walking towards the location of the impact closest to us, we met in the street an Irish friend of mine, Patrick, with his Ukrainian wife and their little baby who is in the pram. And I think the baby's just over 6 months old, something like that. So, and I've introduced Ian to Paddy and Katya and looked at the baby and called him adorable and did all the things that you do. And then as we walk further along, I just remarked on who Patrick is, why he came here. He's then fell in love. They've started a family. There's that. Like, people are not letting the war, rather the other way around, using the war as a reason to do it now. Carpe diem. Take advantage of the opportunity now, because you don't know what might happen down the line. And so whether it's starting a family or starting a business or whatever it is, I once tweeted a photograph of a bowl of pho bo, the Vietnamese soup, pho bo. And I tweeted this and I said, this is why Ukraine's going to win this war. And I think it was about 3 years ago, something like that. And what had happened was, on a street not far from me, an Asian restaurant had opened up, and I wandered in there because I like Asian food and had a faux bow. And then it became one of my regular places, one of my go-to places. And one day, horrors, it's closed. And I'm like, shit, like, I really like that place. And then 2 days later, there's some wording spray painted outside, and there's an arrow pointing, and it says opening soon, 200 meters. And so when I tweeted that bowl of faux bow and I said, this is why Ukraine's going to win, right? It's because these guys, during the full-scale war, they decided, let's open a business, let's open an Asian restaurant. And they'd taken a space that had about 25 covers. And it was so successful that they, after about 6 months, they moved location. That bowl of faux bow, that represents why Ukraine is going to win this war, because that attitude to open your business, for it to be successful, and then to expand your business with all of this going on around you. This is the characteristics of the people of Ukraine, and they will not be defeated. They will not be defeated by Putin. They will not be defeated by their conditions. Your opportunity here in Ukraine, and what I always like to talk about as well, is the opportunities start to come as well. When Ukraine rebuilds, that's going to be an incredible project. And to witness that, to witness a country joining the European Union and then rebuilding after a victory that was hard won, but a victory it will be. To witness all of that, that's what is inspiring. But people taking the here and now, doing something with their lives, whether it's Paddy and Katya having a baby, or whether it's the guys with the Asian restaurant, or, the guys rebuilding their restaurant, because their windows got blown out on Sunday and, opening on Tuesday. Like, it's not just a can-do attitude. It's a, by God, we're going to do this, and we're going to do it well. And it's amazing to be in the middle of this, despite all of the difficulties, despite the hardships, despite the danger. It's amazing to be in the middle. And again, like, to be at a rock concert with 20,000 people, right? Yeah, that was an amazing experience, and one that was thoroughly deserved by every single person who was there to win.
Amazing. First of all, I was going to say to you, restaurants are struggling in Ireland to stay open for a number of reasons. High food prices, probably lots of home working and things like that, So, it's a very, very difficult time for restaurants here. I think the government are being encouraged to, actually, it's part of the deal from the last election that they would reduce the tax, the VAT on restaurants, so they'd have a little bit more margin. But it's a long time coming. And of course, the Iran war, with fuel costs going up and everything, that's after clobbering them. The war in the Middle East, is that impacting things over there, besides Putin getting an extra bit of leg up and from fuel sanctions being eased on him?
Yeah, so the US administration has 3 months in a row issued a waiver on the sanctions against the price of Russian oil, right? The oil itself still exists. It's not further supply that's coming onto the market. And it's supply and demand that is going to dictate what the prices are going to be. There's not further supply coming onto the market. The waiver allows Putin to sell it at a higher price than he would get according to the sanction level, right? So he's gaining because of the Trump administration's generosity, or we can call it something else. Here's another article I wrote recently, by the way, for the Kiev Post. And I pitched it to the editor-in-chief, and I said, I want to write this article. Working title, Is Donald Trump a Russian Asset? Are you interested? And he came back and he's like, well, a few people have tried to write on that topic, but write it and we'll take a look, right? So I wrote it and I submitted it, and he came straight back with 4 exclamation marks. Thanks, Paul. 4 exclamation marks. We're taking this. 4 exclamation marks. And what I lay out there is, there's all these people asking why. Why does Trump always do things that benefit Russia, right? Is there compromise? Is there compromising materials? Is there financial incentives? Is there this? Is there that? You don't need to know that. The definition of an asset is it is a resource that provides benefit. Full stop. A resource that provides benefit. That is what Trump is for Putin. Full stop. He meets the definition. He is a Russian asset. And in this case, for the last 3 months, he has gifted Putin $10 billion additional dollars every month through the sanctions waiver, right? And it does nothing to affect world oil prices because there's no additional supply coming on market. Nothing to affect world prices. $10 billion per month from the Trump administration as a present to Putin, and money that is being used to finance the murder of Ukraine. I think I've forgotten through that little rant what your question even was. How the war in Iran is affecting us.
Yeah.
How the war in Iran is affecting us. There is an upside and there is a downside. The downside is that the amount of missile interceptors that have been used through the Middle East reduces the amount of available interceptors that can be sent to Ukraine and used to defend Ukrainians from Russian missile attacks. That is the downside. The upside is that the solutions that Ukraine has domestically come up with to defend against the drone attacks specifically, but also missile interceptors as well, more and more so. The Ukrainian expertise has not only been acknowledged, but it's been contracted throughout the Middle East now, right? So, what began as the Israeli-US attack on Iran, and then Iran's response to the other countries around the Gulf, whether it's Qatar or the UAE or whoever, they have all understood very, very quickly that Ukraine can defend them. And Zelensky, again, we talk about the role he's played internationally. Zelensky has gone right around the region, and there are Ukrainian teams using Ukrainian equipment that are protecting those countries now. And so Ukraine's defense sector, even after the victory, even after the Russians have been defeated, Ukraine's defense sector is going to have years and years and years of full order books as a result of their ingenuity, as a result of what they've come up with. Necessity is the mother of invention, right? So Ukraine's ingenuity and sheer intelligence have found global market. That's going to be something that will keep this country sustained in terms of defense exports for many years to come now.
You have expertise you wish you never had. You wish you would never wanted in the first place.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you see an end to this war?
Yeah, absolutely. But, I think you might have asked me that question or forms of that question and each of the half a dozen times that we've spoken. I've always said that however it ends, whenever it ends, Ukraine is going to be victorious. But I do see an end to the war now. And again, if I talk about my latest article for Byline Times, what Ukraine is doing on that southern coast, on the occupied parts, there are highways, there is a train line running through the south of Ukraine. And the reason why Russia grabbed that is because when they stole Crimea in 2014, they miscalculated very, very badly because they had no way of supplying it. Crimea is not connected to Russia physically. And so how would they supply it? So they opened the bridge in 2018, but that is not on a firm foundation, either literally or physically. And so the land grab from 2022 was the land corridor to Crimea, the land bridge to Crimea. And Ukraine is breaking that. And with that, the occupation of Crimea is unsustainable. The occupation in the south of Ukraine cannot be supplied. It cannot get new troops. It cannot get ammunition. It cannot get fuel. The land bridge to Crimea, when I said at the beginning that this is going to be a very good summer, I mean this summer. The land bridge to Crimea is being broken. The occupation of Crimea with it will come to an end because it is literally unsustainable. with that, the end of the Vladimir Putin regime, because also the long-range element of Ukraine's war reaching 1,700 kilometers as far as Perm and Chelyabinsk, reaching the Urals. Ukraine has the ability to strike oil production and refining facilities as far as the Ural Mountains, right? And so that's going to kill Russia's economy. And that is what is currently underway. That's what's currently underway. And there's what's called the shaping of the battlefield that's going on in Crimea as well. So they're being blinded all over the place in Crimea. All of their radars are being taken out. All of their air defenses are being taken out. Another major military headquarters, Russian military headquarters in Sevastopol, was blown up 2 days ago as well. I think using British Storm Shadow missiles. If the reporting is or the hints in the reporting, if they're correct, that looks like what took that out. It all comes to a head. The economy is being destroyed because of what Ukraine is doing against the oil infrastructure. The land bridge is being destroyed by the intermediate range drones. The occupation of Crimea cannot continue because it's not sustainable. If I put on my most optimistic hat, when I said this is going to be a very good summer, this summer, Russia is going to be defeated. And Putin, by the way, if you've seen any of his public appearances in the last couple of days, he was just in somewhere in Central Asia. I think he's in Kazakhstan, maybe, but he's slurring his words. He couldn't correctly pronounce the name of, he is in Kazakhstan. He couldn't correctly pronounce the name of the president because he can't get his words out. And a couple of days ago, in the Kremlin, he was doing a speech, and you know, the way that Russians toast sometimes is to go hurrah, 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 and he was not able to utter the words hurrah correctly. So he's on his last legs. He is royally effed. And
you're allowed to say it, Paul.
Can I say it?
Yeah, go on.
That's what he is, and that's what he deserves to be as well. He deserves to be fucked.
Well, maybe it will be a good summer. So back to the music. I know in the middle of all of this, you picked up the guitar. You were taking guitar lessons. Music seems to be an escape. Are there songs for this war? Are there, like I hear about the resilience. Are there songs being blasted from the airwaves in Ukraine? Are there songs of this war that we should treat the listeners to? Maybe you could pick something for me that we can sign off and break some of these copyright rules. I'm going to play this, and you're going to select it, and you're going to tell me why.
Right. I'll tell you two songs by two groups. There's a Ukrainian group called Okeanelzy, right? Okeanelzy is just Okeanelzy, right? They have a song called Я не здамся, which means I will not give up. And the continuation of the lyrics is Я не здамся без бою. I will not give up without a fight, right? And that song is like 25 years old. Okeanelzy have been around for 30 years. Actually, the concert I'm going to go and see on Sunday is the lead singer, the head of Okeanelzy. He's doing a solo concert, headlining a festival, which I guess is a day of acts of other groups. But Я не здамся is... For the people of Ukraine, it's like a second national anthem. Everybody in this country knows that song. Everybody, and Slava Vakrachuk, the lead singer of Okeanelzy, I mean, people would call him Ukraine's answer to Bono, right? So, that is his level of fame. U2, Okeanelzy, that is how they're, literally perceived, on a national level. So, Я не здамся Я не здамся без бою. I'm not giving up without a fight. And everybody in the country knows that song, right? And literally that's the status, second national anthem.
Що ж це я не зумів зупинитися вчасно, все ясно, зі мною tepер i nazavždy písno nejdi від мене. Рап-рап-пароди-бандай, я налию собі, я налию тобі вина, а хочеш із медом. Хто ти є, ти взяла моє життя і не віддала. Хто ти є, ти випила мою кров і п'яною впала. Твої очі кличуть, хочуть мене, ведуть за собою. Хто ти є, ким би не була ти? Я не здамся без бою. Я не здамся без бою. Що ж це я не зумів, не зупинити себе, тебе сьогодні так дує без тебе, сумую без тебе, накинь щось на себе.
And the other song that I will point you towards, so the band that I saw the weekend before last is a band called Boombox, right? And the lead singer of Boombox, and one of the reasons maybe that I got trolled so much for my posting on Twitter a Boombox concert, but the lead singer of Boombox, his name is Andrei Klivnyuk. He's, since the 24th of February, since the invasion, he's also serving in defense of Ukraine. He's a rock star. He did not need to go and fight, but the first post that I saw from him on the day of the full-scale invasion was Zbroye, like, we have weapons, right? And then a couple of days later, he's standing on a beautiful square in the center of Kiev, early morning. I think it was about 6 o'clock in the morning. And a cappella, he sang an old Ukrainian song. And then, because musicians all know each other, one day David Gilmour phoned him and said, what can we do to help you? And we saw that clip. Can we do something with that? So Pink Floyd recorded, we're using Andrei's a cappella, just solo from the Sofievsky Square in the center of Kiev. They recorded their first new piece of music in, I think it was 20 years or something like that. So you've got David Gilmour and Nick Mason, and they're sitting there with this going on in the background. And so the Pink Floyd version is called Hey, Hey, Rise Up. Uh-huh. And that song, Hey, Hey, Rise Up, all of the proceeds were donated to charity. And the last time I asked, the amount of money that they'd raised from that was £500,000 from that one single that was Pink Floyd featuring Andrei Klivnyuk from Boombox. So there's a couple of things that you should listen to. But anything you find from either of those bands, Okeanelzy or Boombox, it's all worth listening to. They're both awesome bands. But what they're both doing as well. So Andrei, when he's in Ukraine, he's in the armed forces. He's doing that job. But then the group tours, and the musicians, they have to pay their rent. They have to put food on the table. So the group goes and tours overseas normally. These were their first concerts in Kiev, their first concerts in Ukraine. But they have raised, because they fundraise off the back of their tours, they've raised $4 million from their touring over the last couple of years. And the other group that I'm mentioning, Okeanelzy, also tour internationally. And they have raised, from their concerts overseas, $10 million for the defense of Ukraine as well, right? So not just good music to listen to, but good people. Really good.
Paul, have a wonderful, wonderful summer. And I hope the next time we talk, we're planning on that get-together at the end of all this shite.
After the victory, as we call it here.
After the victory, exactly.
After the victory.
Exactly.
After the victory. I said at the beginning, just one more little story. I said at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, I'm not leaving here until the victory, right? And I have actually done so since. I briefly had to go to Berlin for a meeting. So I went to Berlin and back in 5 days, which there's no planes in or out of Ukraine, right? So Berlin and back in 5 days was a heck of a schedule, right? But as well as a meeting that I had to go and attend for Lifeline Ukraine, I also had to renew the kind of visa that you need to get your residency permit, because my residency permit to be here had actually expired, right? And when that's expired, you need to go overseas. You need to get this new visa. And so when I left Ukraine to go to Berlin and I handed over my expired residency permit, the border guard to me and he said, till the end of the war, this is not a problem, in English, right? And I returned to him in Ukrainian and I said, not before the end of the war, you mean until the victory?
Excellent.
He just laughed at me. So that's what we call it. And I pulled up the border guard for using incorrect terminology, but he was doing his best to speak English. So it was just a funny moment between me and him at this, and now shared with your listeners too. After the victory, Greg, I look forward to welcoming you to Kiev.
Yeah, and I'm sure that border guard, he probably repeated that story to some of his buddies.
I'm sure he did.
Yeah. You're legendary in Berlin. Paul, take it easy. Have a great summer.
Thanks, Greg. All the best.
Cheers. Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.